How can you call India one of the four genuine sovereign nations aside from Russia, China, and the US, when the matter of fact is that our nation is still continuing the British Constitution? The judiciary system is from the British times. We see our culture and people getting absorbed by the Western propagandists on at will. And then we have our PM visiting Ukraine from external pressure. Is having an independent foreign policy the only factor that should count when it, towards being called a genuinely sovereign nation? Okay, good question. Very good question. Um, I was recently in Hong Kong a couple of weeks or so ago. Um, it was kind of a diplomatic visit, so to say. And I had a conversation with a Chinese professor of law, a conversation over coffee in a cafe. We spoke for about an hour. And I wanted to understand the Chinese legal system. And the professor told me that the Chinese legal system, it's got two sets of laws. One is for the criminal justice, and one is for the civilian justice, let's say. And the Chinese legal system, the Chinese legal code, is kind of copy pasted from various European codes. Okay, so it's not just India that has British laws. Most countries have European and Western laws, even the Chinese. Okay, so the judicial system is very much, and if you go to Macau, etc., the judicial system is in Portuguese. Macau is a part of China. In Hong Kong, they have a separate judicial system compared to China, and so on. So even in China, you have the situation. Okay, um, the constitution, the Chinese constitution. I'm not sure. I've not looked at it. I am not sure where it is taken from. Is it a purely, entirely Chinese civilizational constitution, or is it also inspired by various Western constitutions? I'm not sure. But in India, I agree. The Indian constitution is a copy paste job of various Western constitutions. The judicial system is entirely rooted in European jurisprudence. There's nothing, there are no Indian values, or there's no Indian civilizational touch in the Indian judicial system, the legal system, the laws, all of that, the corpus of laws that we have, the penal codes and civil codes and all that, um, and so on. Now, why do I say that India is a genuinely sovereign nation? It's not just about the independent foreign policy. Overall, the Indian government and the Indian system, it is aligned with the Indian national interest, not the Indian civilizational interest, but the Indian national interest. And there is little or less foreign interference in this matter. You can never have zero foreign interference, even in the US, even if you're American. But overall, we are no one's vassal. So number one, we have the entire system is geared toward the Indian national interest, whether it is the government, whether it is the military, important, whether it is the kind of laws you can pass, and so on. Let me contrast that with, let's say, Germany or France or Italy. What does it mean for a nation to be sovereign? It means that your democratically elected or undemocratically elected, whatever, your leadership should be able to pass its own laws, right? Secondly, it should be able, your nation should be able to control its own currency and its own economy. Yes, in the EU, nations can't even pass their own laws. Their laws are essentially nothing but rehashes of the laws that are passed in Brussels, the headquarters of the European Union. France or Germany or Italy or Spain or whoever, they aren't in a position to pass laws that are contradictory to what Brussels passes. Do you call that sovereignty? No, it is not sovereignty. You are not a sovereign nation anymore. Secondly, the currency in the European Union is the euro. The euro is essentially a rebranded Deutsche Mark. Okay, so France had this great currency, the franc, gone, wiped out. Uh, the Spanish had the peseta, the peso. What did they have? Probably the peso, gone, wiped out. Italy had the lira, gone, wiped out. These countries cannot even control their own economy. They cannot even control a currency that they own. Zero sovereignty, right? So in the EU, you have pooled sovereignty. The real power lies in Brussels. All the decision making happens in Brussels, and these nations are completely helpless. Then they can't even control their own borders. You have to allow in immigrants. The whole EU, the Schengen zone, is open to all citizens. So you can't say, okay, people from so and so EU nation cannot come into my country because they're troublemakers. You can't say that anymore. You can't control your borders. You can't control your currency. You can't control your economy. You can't even pass your own laws. And if you happen to be a member of NATO, even you don't even control your own military. That is called lack of sovereignty. India has its own currency. India controls its own economy. India controls its own borders. There are problems, but overall we still control our borders. So we have our own currency. We control our the entire economic activity. We pass our own laws. We control our borders. We can decide who comes and who doesn't come in, and we don't have any foreign military presence on Indian territory. So if you put all of these things together, despite having imperfections, India is a genuinely sovereign country. And there are only four such nations in the world: the US, India, Russia, and China. No other nation is fully sovereign. Okay, there are other countries. You will give me examples. Okay, so and so country has its own currency. So and so country controls its own borders, and so on. But these countries, they will be compromised in other ways. Their foreign policy will be an extension of, let's say, the US foreign policy. Let's say Japan. Japan has its own currency, the yen, which means that they control their currency, they control their economy. Let's say, okay, uh, they pass their own laws. They have elections. They pass their own laws. All of that. They control their borders. But then there's the question of the US occupation of Japan. More than 130 permanent US military bases on Japanese soil. And the Japanese government cannot take any big decisions when it comes to military policy or security policy or external policy or economy without the approval of the US generals, and so on. So there are so many examples that you can give, but I can always give you counterpoints. So there are only four genuinely sovereign nations: the US, Russia, China, and India. It's not only about the independent foreign policy. There's a whole lot more that goes into this. Hopefully this makes sense.